I'm Liam.
I'm Wayne,
You're listening to In Film We Trust YouTube.
a place where we post clips from our recent episode.
All links down below in the description.
And now, on with the show.
Funnily enough, Wayne, I actually always assumed that Cannibal Holocaust was the first found footage film.
I thought that's actually what the first found footage film was.
Always. Until we was researching for this, I didn't realise there was a 1961 film called The Connection by a female director called Shirley Clarke, experimental film director. And it was essentially, they were looking for a missing documentary filmmaker.
Okay.
And it was set in this milieu of drug addiction and jazz.
Right. Why do you think that didn't get the same attention that later ones got?
I think it was very experimental.
Right, okay.
And I don't think it became a form yet. You know, when things become a form, they become a movement,
Yeah.
and they become formulaic. That finds fans by itself, just by the formula itself, like the slasher movie genre.
Yeah, basically, yeah, because like when I was doing research, Cannibal Holocaust, 1980, Ruggero Deodato,
Yep.
first one that came up, extremely controversial film. I love the backstory behind it. It's unbelievable that, like, when I watched the film, I rewatched it again recently, I still can't believe that was fake. So many of the kills are so realistic, I can't believe that it was actually staged.
It is. Look, this might sound like hyperbole, but I would almost say Cannibal Holocaust's a masterpiece. Would you?
I'd say almost a modern masterpiece.
I would
yeah.
say so. It's so effectively, and a lot of that news footage was influenced by the Red Brigade's terrorism of the 1970s.
That's where it came. That's where it was influenced by.
Yeah, this kind of, because can you remember in Italy in the 1970s there was the Red Brigades, the communist kind of insurgency, the terrorism, the kidnappings, etc. And this would be on the news. It would be pervasive throughout the 70s, and this is where he would get this idea for these kind of grimy news footage.
I think what got it so much attention is because the characters die in the film, he actually instructed the actors to go into hiding for a certain amount of time, and Deodato was brought up on charges of murder because people actually thought they had literally died making the film.
Well, the first charges were for obscenity.
Obscenity, yeah.
And then they were amended to include murder, which is ridiculous. Look, I don't care what decade this is from. So they must be savvy somewhat to realise, well, it's clearly a film. Some of it's kind of hokey. You can kind of tell this is a film.
Yeah, but the actors I think they actually did have to come out of hiding in order to prove him innocent.
Ridiculous, Wayne.
Ridiculous, yeah.
But yeah, found footage, actually, the plot device itself, it's not original to movie making. You have the epistolarial novels. If I'm pronouncing that right. That sounded wrong, but we'll go with it.
We'll go with that.
Even Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Frankenstein, yeah.
Yeah, all these like diary forms.
Yeah.
And you can see the genesis for found footage.
Yeah, because it puts it like a first-person perspective. The thing I noticed is most of them are used for horror films because it gives it that realism. It's usually about finding footage left behind from people who have disappeared and killed. Maybe it's to give it an extra credibility that it wouldn't have had otherwise if it was just directed as a mainstream horror film.
And when it's done well, it's done really well.
It can be done very well,
really effective, because you don't have the bells and whistles, you don't have the score, which we should say with Cannibal Holocaust, you could almost call it a hybrid, couldn't you?
It did.
Because there is moments of narrative in there. You have the score, you have the scenes, I think, is it in New York?
The framing device of them watching the footage in New York, yeah.
So there is elements of just traditional narrative there.
Yeah, but then it's kind of overlaid with this almost kind of incongruous classical music played over, like the huts burning down and things like that.
Yeah, so you're getting a genesis of almost a traditional film within this kind of new experimental way.
Yeah.
But you also have films from like 1989 called the Mcpherson Tape, or it's also known as the UFO abduction.
Yeah.
So we're getting even though you can't really call found footage a genre. Can you call it a genre? Because it encapsulates so many different...
No, the genre is part of it, like found footage horror. So no, it kind of works its way. It's more kind of an encompassing term rather than a genre, I'd say.
I would say more of a form.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And, well, the Mcpherson Tape was made for just $6,500.
Like before post-production and such.
I'd assume so, yeah.
Yeah, because the film that we'd have to talk about that really brought it to the cultural forefront was Blair Witch Project.
Which
1999,
which is kind of formative for us, because that's probably the first, I don't know about you, but was that the first found footage film you'd ever heard of?
That probably would have been, yeah.
I think so as well.
It was the first one mainstream audiences heard of because it was made for less than $1 million and it made $250 at the box office. And that did a similar thing to Cannibal Holocaust because even the advertising campaign said the actors were either missing or deceased. Yeah.
It was made for between 35 and 60,000 just.
Yeah, and then the post-production took it up to like 750,000 or something.
So what did they do in post-production?
They just stitch the footage together. I don't know why it cost that much.
Does that include marketing or?
Well, I don't know, because with those people, at the start, they're like interviewing people, because with the Blair Witch, it's like we're talking about Lamb, it's like the lore.
The mythology of the town.
The folklore as well.
Shot in 8 days as well.
Yeah, the story I remember reading about it was when it came out, some people loved it, but a lot of folk got motion sickness because of the
shaky cam.
The shaky cam, yeah, it really made people feel sick.
I can always remember in like high school the debates as if it was real or not. Can you?
Yeah.
Back in the day,
or whether it was
primary school, I should say,
or whether it was fantastic or just an overrated mess.
What was your opinion of it then? My opinion improved through the years.
I liked it. I think it was one of the first films that made me really appreciate, like first horror films made me appreciate there not being like a visible monster on screen.
But do you not think there was an element of bravado as well? It's like, oh, well, you don't see anything. It's not scary.
Yeah, kind of thing. I can understand like the backlash it's had. And for me, found footage is an interesting idea that I think in later years has been exploited. It's kind of excuse to make usually a horror film on the cheap and just say, oh, the fact it looks terrible and it's bad camera work.
That's part of its appeal.
It's part of its aesthetic, yeah. So,
but the Blair Witch, interestingly, that was at the time accused of ripping off a film called The Last Broadcast from 1998.
Yeah.
Which is often seen as an influence on Blair Witch, even though Blair Witch was conceived years prior to The Last Broadcast.
But Blair Witch just got all the attention.
Yeah, and I mean, The Last Broadcast was extremely cheap. It was made for $900.
$900.
And it was about the New Jersey Devil.
Oh, okay. Then I've heard of the Jersey Devil. Yeah,
It did make a small profit. It did make a good profit for $900 to $12,000.
Yeah,
so.
And it's still popular today with obviously Paranormal Activity, which actually, in terms of profit margin, was more successful than Blair Witch Project, wasn't it?
That's because of the price it was made for. It was the most profitable film ever made, and only shot in 7 days by Oren Peli.
Yeah. And of course, they managed to neuter it like all horror franchises are by basically making a bunch of sequels which are nowhere near as successful or as good.
No, because I really liked the first Paranormal Activity. Did you?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it though. Another film I liked as well was, did you ever see the Poughkeepsie tapes?
No, I keep meaning to see that, but I've never seen it.
Interesting. I only seen it because it came up. It was hyped in the news. It was like this new mega controversial film. Like, well, I have to see this. It's kind of part doc because they're chasing this serial killer who they find these tapes behind that he makes of his victims. And it's kind of part found footage because they're watching the tapes, part documentary because they're analyzing the killer and looking at evidence. So it's kind of a blend of genres there.
Rec was good. Spanish film.
I haven't seen that. I know which one you mean.
I think it was remade as Quarantine in the US.
Oh, was it? I really liked Chronicle actually. Chronicle had the problem a lot of found footage films have of who's holding the camera. There's certain scenes where there shouldn't be a camera in the scene, but I actually enjoyed Chronicle.
Was Chronicle not a higher budgeted one as well?
It
wasn't
was.
it?
Josh Trank, before he did the excellent Fan Forstick movie.
Well,
that everyone hated.
Should we not mention that?
Yeah, but it was a high budget. I've seen other ones. Megan is Missing. That wasn't bad.
No.
Kind of typical teenager gets abducted storyline. Searching was another one. Unfriended Dark Web. The problem with that one is it's not a very thematic film. You're entirely watching people Skype.
Well, Netflix put out a slew of them, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
These cheap, straight to Netflix type.
If I Google, list of found footage movies, most of them I've never even heard of. You can make them on the cheap, you can advertise them for little, and they'll generally turn a profit. I never rush to see a found footage film. I mean, I respect like what the genre, what the concept has done, but for me, it's a lot of time it's an excuse to just make really terrible horror films on the cheap.
But look, you have to start somewhere. That same argument could be applied to many slasher films in the 80s.
Produce some good ones, I suppose.
Well, some people say the found footage is the new slasher. Well, maybe a decade ago, it's kind of fell out of favour again, the found footage.
Yeah, also been neutered by overuse, I think.